Welcome, everybody. This is the 2018 candidate debates for District Attorney candidate and Sacramento County Sheriff candidates. My name is Tiffany Breslin-Moyer, and I'm here representing two organizations, American Civil Liberties Union of Sacramento County and National Lawyers Guild of Sacramento Chapter. I have a couple of just housekeeping things that we're going to do, and we're going to also introduce National Lawyers Guild here. Tonight I'll represent exclusively ACLU, and then I will introduce a moderator, and we'll just get right started. So ACLU is a nonpartisan, nonprofit national organization with staff in every single state working to protect and advance civil liberties as a guardian of justice, fairness, equality, and freedom for almost 100 years. The ACLU of Northern California is the largest ACLU affiliate in the country, with over 150,000 members, making up about 10% of ACLU's total membership. We do local advocacy, serve as civil liberties watchdogs for local government, implement statewide and federal ACLU grassroots campaigns, and organize public events like this one. Next month, you can join us for a bail reform film screening on May 26th at 3 p.m. at the Elk Grove Library. We will also be tabling at Sacramento Pride on June 10th. If you'd like to learn more about our local ACLU chapter, sign up for our mailing list on our webpage at aclusac.org. And now I'm going to introduce our National Lawyers Guild Sacramento Chapter President, Elizabeth.
Hello, everybody. Hi. I'll leave the thank yous for my colleagues that know how to better pronounce all the names, but I just want to say how touched and amazed I am at all of you guys attending today, so give yourselves a round of applause, please. And I don't know the quote exactly, but something about doing a great job, 90% of it is showing up, right? So we want to thank the candidates for being here to engage with your voting community. So just a little bit about NLG if you don't know already. We're the ones with the green hats on in the news if you're seeing us lurking around. We're there to protect your First Amendment rights and your ability to exercise that right. So historically, we've always been best friends with ACLU. We've celebrated just recently our 80th anniversary being in this country as the first racially integrated bar association. And back in 1937, a group of attorneys in New York gathered around and said that the American Bar Association is not racially integrated, they're very conservative, and they decided that we needed a counter for that. So they grouped together with some ACLU attorneys as well as from the American Federation of Labor, and they got together, and here we are. The rest is history, and we've always been on the correct side of history in terms of fighting for rights, and our motto is that we fight for human rights over property interests. So that's why we're here today. We want to, again, thank everybody for being here. A couple of housekeeping items. We have some announcements. The National Lawyers Guild Sacramento chapter has their elections coming up on May 19th. So if you're interested in participating more than you already are, please come and at least meet the new board, people who are running, be engaged. And we also have, actually, please come speak to me if you're interested in running for any of the board positions after the event. And then we also have another event at the Scottish Rite Center this Sunday at 12:30 for Palestinian rights. So if you're interested in that, we're passing around some flyers, and I know David Mandel, our board members, is around as well to give out information on that. So with that, I'll turn it back over to my colleague Tiffany.
All right, if you haven't noticed, we're being hosted tonight in the lecture hall at the McGeorge School of Law. So we want to thank them for graciously hosting or giving us this space for free tonight. Although the food wasn't free, so please eat it all. A particular thank you to Leah Adams, Paul, Chris, and Kevin Hinsey, and all of the staff at McGeorge for their kind assistance over the last few weeks. They were very kind in dealing with all of my nagging questions. Thanks to all the community members and organizations who have come together for tonight's important discussion on criminal justice in Sacramento County. Throughout the program, you will hear from 3 community members who have graciously offered to share a personal story with us tonight. Their names are Deborah, Christine, and Allegra. Also, thanks to Alan Ash and Christopher Lodgens for joining us this evening and live streaming this special event for our entire county to see. Another thank you to Danny Garza, who will be taking photos tonight, and Russell Steiger of Colleen's Video Production, who will take video shots throughout the evening. And finally, thank you to our candidates for being a part of this very important community discussion this evening. I would like to introduce our moderator now. Erika D. Smith is an associate editor and an opinion writer who joined the Sacramento Bee in May 2015. She writes about public policy and social justice issues, as well as housing and homelessness. She previously worked for the Indianapolis Star in Indiana, where she was a Metro columnist. She also worked for 5 years at the Akron Beacon Journal. Please join your hands for Erika.
Thank you all. Thank you for allowing me to moderate this forum. Before we get started, I wanted to read off a little bit of ground rules for this evening. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to introduce him or herself, and then have 90 seconds to address each question. Somebody will be here on the stage, I'm not sure where, to kind of keep track of time. And questions were submitted mostly from the audience, but from several organizations, so we'll be answering those questions as well. I want to introduce our first person, who is Noah Phillips. He's running for district attorney. With over 20 years as a prosecutor, Democrat Noah Phillips is a principal criminal attorney in the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office, Major Crime Division. He has spent his career prosecuting murders and other complex criminal cases, including some of his most notorious in Sacramento's recent history. As supervising attorney of the District Attorney's Domestic Violence, Human Trafficking, and Elder Abuse units, Noah ran a large team of prosecutors and administrative staff and managed filing decisions for thousands of cases this year. We had put several invitations out for the current district attorney, Anne-Marie Schubert, but she declined to attend. In the interest of fairness, the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild will offer her the same questions that we're going to ask tonight. And if she does answer those questions, they've pledged to make those answers publicly available. But in the meantime, I want to help me introduce Noah Phillips to the stage. I think we're going to go back here. Did everybody see okay from where we are? Okay, great. Well, thank you. So, 2 minutes for an opening statement.
Good evening. I wanted to first of all thank the ACLU and the NLG for hosting this debate tonight. I'd also like to give a shout out to McGeorge. This is my alma mater. I was here back in 1997.
Have you paid off your student loans yet?
I paid off the student loans. My dad's in the audience, you know. But I just want to say this. I know it's part of my 2 minutes, but I'm going to use it. McGeorge is in an exciting period of change, but change can be difficult, and it's nice to have people stand by you when you're in a period of change. So I ask you to look around, stand up for McGeorge, and help him out if you can. You know, being in this business, a prosecutor, it's part of who I am. It's part of my blood. I tell people, you know, I met my wife doing this. She was one of my jurors. She was juror number 3 back about 10 years ago. I waited until after the case. And public service is in my blood. You know, I talked about my dad. He was a public servant. He worked for Robert F. Kennedy, among others, back in D.C. a long time ago, marched with Martin Luther King Jr. We've got about 50 years of public service in my family. And the reason I got into this business was back in 1996, a great career prosecutor named Dave Drewliner came over to McGeorge across the street, talked to me about fighting for the little guy, fighting for people that need someone to stand up for them or stand next to them. That's why most people get into this business, either as a prosecutor or as a defense attorney. And when he said all those things and talked about what justice is and who needs it, I bought all that, hook, line, and sinker. And so I've spent my life like that, professionally and personally. So my platform, in the time I have left, you'll hear more about it in the questions, I'm sure, centers around criminal justice reform. So over the last 20 years, I was a successful prosecutor in the ways that you might expect in trial, or managing lawyers, or teaching people about what we do. But we broke the system. You know, we created the problems that exist: mass incarceration, the failed drug wars, the school to prison pipeline. We did that, prosecutors, good ones like me. So I'm here to tell you I'm sorry, and I'm here to fix it. And so my platform centers around criminal justice reform and how it can best address these problems and make you safe at the same time.
That's great. I'm cutting you off.
Okay. Wait, can I have a minute? My opponent isn't here. Can I take a minute?
Well, that was actually a really good segue, because we're going to be covering 5 topics today. These are mostly selected by people in the audience, but equal access to justice, prosecution of mental illness and substance abuse, charging and sentencing, juvenile justice, and transparency and accountability, which all, I think, fall under what you were talking about. For the first category, we're going to talk a little bit about the money bail system. I think you know that it's pretty common in California for people to get arrested and not be able to buy their way out for freedom, and they sit sometimes for weeks and years waiting for a trial date. There's a bill right now that just made it out of one house, and it's up for consideration in the Assembly, SB 10, that would do away with a good chunk of the money bail system. What are your thoughts on that bill, and in general, what are your thoughts on the money bail system?
I fully support Senate Bill 10. I fully support the idea of removing cash bail from the state of California. And it's my... You know, if you're a line deputy, either as a public defender or a district attorney, you see it every day. You see people in the system in a catch-22. You can get arrested, and you can either stay in custody and fight your case, you'll lose your job and pick up a criminal record, or you can plead guilty to something that may not be in your best interest to plead guilty to. You pick up a charge, and it's hard for you to get a job in the future. Very difficult position to be in. And I think we can all agree that there is not necessarily a nexus between wealth and being safe. And what I mean is, there is no evidence-based information or study that suggests people with money are less dangerous than people without money. So we're left with a system where poor people and people, typically black and brown people, are disproportionately affected by the cash money bail system we have. I like to tell people it's not an if or a when, it's simply a how of how we change the bail system. I fully support SB 10. Let's say hypothetically it came to pass that Senate Bill 10 did not pass. I would still be in favor of creating a system like a pretrial services system like we have in the federal courts and in our juvenile courts that deal with a risk assessment versus a cash bail system.
Great. Another area that I think disproportionately affects poor, particularly black and brown people, are fines and fees, which California has quite a few. Is there any thoughts that you have about how to reform that system on a local level as opposed to going through the state? I know that there's been some movement at the Capitol on that, but if elected, what would you do to specifically address that problem?
Yes, 2 ways that you reform the criminal justice system. One is by electing prosecutors that most align with your ideals and what you think the criminal justice system should be about. The other way is through legislation, right? You can go over to the Capitol and try to create laws that will help with that same ideology. There are certain fines and fees that are required by law. You can advocate as a district attorney for changes to legislation like those types of laws, but you can also, as the chief prosecutor in a particular county, enact policies that tend to reduce your standard fines and fees, and arguably take the fines and fees that are associated with certain vehicle code violations and simply just not prosecute those cases. So there are a couple of ways that we could reduce the fines and fees that are required here in Sacramento County. To do that, you would do that as the chief prosecutor, but also I would argue that when it comes to legislation, I would be a forward-thinking legislator as far as it relates to criminal justice reform and how the laws can help us in that.
And one last question on that. A number of people, and I think it's less so with driver's license than some of the amnesty programs, but people have been thrown in jail for not paying those. As a prosecutor and as a DA, would you advocate for not jailing people for not paying a parking ticket that's gone up, by tremendous amounts, or a speeding ticket?
Yeah, the new model, what we're hoping to do, if you are a forward-thinking prosecutor, is find ways where we can incarcerate people less, not more. What we're coming to realize is that it is very expensive to incarcerate people. At the one end, to incarcerate somebody in state prison, it costs about $76,000 a year. That's a lot of money. Even on the lower end, when we're incarcerating people for their inability to pay fines, it's expensive to hold people in your local jail. There is absolutely no reason to be doing that if we can remove people from the criminal justice system and continue to keep the public safe.
Okay, we're going to move on to our next topic on mental illness and substance abuse. And I believe that we have somebody that wanted to come up and ask a question and tell a story. Deborah Slay.
Good evening, everyone. I have a question. By a show of hands, how many people know someone that is suffering from mental illness? And by a show of hands, how many people have someone in their family that is suffering from mental illness? By a show of hands, how many people have a son that attempted suicide by cop? I'm the mother of Kenneth Ardell Smith. He is the young man that attempted suicide by cop 3 years ago this month. He went through a very trying time entering the prison system at the age of 18. When he was released, he wasn't there. He was there, but his mind wasn't. He talked about suicide. He even rapped his obituary when he was released from the medical facility in Vacaville in December. It was December 19th. December 24th, he had his first psychotic breakdown. Took him to UC Davis, where he was committed for 3 days. After he got out, in about 3 months, and then during that time, he started cutting on himself. He talked about suicide. He talked about just any of the things that went on in prison. He had been destroyed. I called Sac PD for assistance. They came to my daughter's house. They said he didn't fit the criteria. Within 24 hours, my son attempted suicide by cop. He walked up to Sac PD and produced a cell phone and pointed at them in attempts for them to shoot him. He was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor. But when the DA's office got a hold of it, they turned it into a felony, penal code 69. He was jailed and made an example of him. Because I went public about the media, we did press conferences. We got out in front of the jail. We made some noise. Treat, don't charge is what we chanted. Treat, don't charge. That's all he needed was treatment. He didn't need to go back to prison, but he did. And he's still in prison to this day. He got out of prison. He went back in on a violation. No treatment, only medication. Supervision in prisons in a cement cell. There's no treatment there. Right now, he is doing okay. He went from Jamestown prison, and now he's in Ione. He was in Jamestown, and he went into a mental crisis and had to be moved to Stockton to a mental health bed, and now he's in Ione. He's still going through it. And I visit him at 9 p.m. the night before court. And my son called me at 10 p.m. and said, Mom, they're gonna let me get released tomorrow if I just say I'm sorry to the officers. They had the officers in court. My son stood there, and it's called the dress blue. It's the green outfit when you are suicidal. He stood there without undergarments on and was coerced to apologize to the police officers. And he did. They let him out, but he was going to be out in 60 days anyway. They made an example of him. He has 2 strikes now, and he's sitting in state penitentiary. My heart goes out there. To everyone that's suffering like him. Another thing I just wanted to add real quick is that because of his incident, I've become part of the CIT training team for law enforcement here in Sacramento. Because I asked God to give me a platform so I could speak to law enforcement coming from my voice. I can never tell my son's testimony, but it can only come through me, what I experienced, being impacted by his mental illness. I'm just blown away at what he had to go through to get to where he's at, and everyone else that is suffering. As I train, real quick, and I will wrap it up. As I train, the loudest thing I say during the training is cell phone, because that is what saved his life. Because when my son pointed that cell phone at Sacramento, Officer Kelly Strike yelled out cell phone, and that saved his life. Cell phone. She noticed it. And 3 years later, I got the opportunity to thank her because she was part of the CIT training. My last one I did in January. I'm going to start doing them again next month. But after I did a training, she walked up to me as I was walking down the aisle, and she clocked me. She said, I just was sitting in my seat. I didn't know what to say. I'm like, I was on that case. I'm the officer. And she just said, I'm like, who are you? She said, I'm the officer that yelled cell phone. Oh my God, what a moment I had. All I wanted to do was think, and I was not given that opportunity 3 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you.
This question is for a candidate for DA. My son and others like him suffer from mental illness. They are in desperate need of treatment and of incarceration. Do you, Noah Phillips, commit to diverting people living with mental health disorders away from our criminal justice system and into community-based or alternative treatment programs?
Thank you for your question and your amazing story. I want to unpack a little bit of the answer is yes, and let me talk to you a little bit about, I just want to thank you also for being part of the CIT training, which is the training that officers go, crisis intervention training that officers go through. I think your story, if we want them to be the best that they can be out there, we want them to be safe, but we want them to be safe not only for themselves, but for everyone. Having you a part of that, having that story told are the kinds of steps that we can take from a community perspective to make them safe for all of us. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
My answer to you is yes. I'd like to break it up just briefly into the investigative side, then the prosecution side, because you know there was a lot there in that answer. That's the officer that you described, the officer that was able to correctly identify that was a cell phone. That's the officer we're looking to make, right? That's the officer that has the right frame of mind to be out in the field making critical decisions and making the right critical decisions. So whatever we're doing with her, we need to figure that out and make that a reality for the police department in general, right? Because she did the right things at the right time. What we're looking for on the investigative side, I think, to help people like your son that don't belong in the criminal justice system are officers that have better mental health crisis intervention and a better understanding of mental health issues. But I also, from my perspective, think in populations or areas where we know mental health issues permeate, or they're calls specific with mental health issues related to them, that we should have mental health professionals going out with law enforcement to make those kinds of calls. Because law enforcement, in are not mental health professionals. You know, we want them to be more oriented to mental health issues, but having somebody with them would also help on that. From the prosecution side, what we want, it's a public health crisis. It's not a criminal justice issue. So the more people we can divert from the system, I agree with you, where mental health drives the conduct, the better we will be without having them in the system altogether.
Thank you.
May I ask a follow-up?
So we're gonna have some chances to actually ask some questions at the end.
It's right on this topic, and it's about this specifically. As district attorney, you'd have the power to review that case and that conviction and recall it and void it if you now believe the evidence does not sustain the charge. Would you be willing to do that if elected?
I can absolutely take another look at that case. I'll meet up with her. Typically, if there's been a conviction, I'd have to go through post-conviction review and evaluate how we go about that, but the answer is yes.
Thank you. I'm not going to take your questions right now. I'm sorry, I'm not going
I
to.
just want to ask you a question. Like, what are y'all going to do about Stephon Clark case? I mean, are you going, like, if you sit here and say that you're going to take over, what's her name, Schubert job, are you going to convict the police officers that are guilty of killing Stephon Clark? Yes or fucking no? I mean, because if we talk about reforming, wait a minute, if we talk about reforming, we got to be talking about reforming everything. We're talking about everything. We're talking about giving homeless people better resources. You know what I'm saying? We're talking about people. These are the lives of people that y'all are fucking with. You know what I'm saying? These people have children. So when you sit here and you give an oath, are you giving an oath of the people that you serve on the front lines of, or the side by side of, or are you giving an oath for the people? That's what it's about. And me right now, I can't take you serious. I can't take shit that you send out your mouth serious. Here you sit there and talk about your father marching on the front lines of Dark Martin Luther King. That's one of my ancestors. I take that highly disrespectful as a person of color, because that does not justify anything. When I look at him as, I don't that. I look at him as an observer, just like anybody else. You know what I'm saying? For anybody of color who have died on this soil, who have fought for our liberation, our fucking freedom, because we are tired of being tired.
Are you going to let him answer the question?
No, wait a minute. No, my fucking question is to him.
Okay, but are you going to answer
I'm
it?
gonna answer my goddamn question, but I'm gonna
You don't have to swear.
But I'm gonna tell you like this: no, it's my freedom of speech. That's the first rule of the Constitution. In no way, shape, or form should I be deprived of my freedom of speech. So
You can have a freedom of speech. You can have a freedom of speech, but it doesn't mean you have to
Okay,
swear.
whatever. I'm not even talking. I'm dressing him right here, because my thing is, you have a duty to uphold. This woman just got done telling you about her son's condition. They have shown and proved that they even killed people with mental health issues. You say, and not Joseph, man, haven't been convicted. How the hell is that possible? And you sit here and you give your lullabies and your alibis of bullshit. But my thing is, are you dedicated to give that commitment to these people?
Is that your question?
No, is he going to hold up to that?
Is that your question? I'm asking, is that your question?
Y'all shouldn't even vote this cocksucker, this motherfucker.
Hey.
Y'all hear what I'm saying? Y'all shouldn't vote for him. Because my thing is, I'm gonna tell
Are
you.
you going to let him answer his question? Are you going to actually let him answer his question?
Fuck you too. And I'm gonna tell you like this. One thing I would stand for. You sit here and you talk about you taking away the bail. Now we talk about mass incarceration, right? The school and prison pipeline, right? Now we know that all black people are based on that incarceration, that mass incarceration. So that means you jail more black people. That means more black people sick, even when they're innocent. How can you give that person back their life? There's men that's innocent right now, that's innocent of murder in y'all county jails, in y'all prison system. And y'all sit there and y'all talk about, oh, their case haven't touched my desk yet. Well, goddammit, you do something about it. You stand up to what you give your oath to do. You stand up for what's right. You stand up for justice.
That's right.
That's what it's about. You stand for the people because the people matter. We all matter.
That's
we sit
right.
here and say Black Lives Matter,
That's
Indigenous
right.
lives matter. This is the native land that y'all stole from them, the people that was abolished.
That's right.
God damn it.
Answer him.
And y'all people right here, y'all need to wake up. Y'all need to wake up and start taking back what's yours. This is your land. Y'all make decisions. My thing is, y'all vote these politics in. Y'all can vote their ass out and take the power back and take back what's yours.
That's right.
And I got to tell you, I long live the Black Panther Party. My people was ex-Black Panther members. And they died for this shit. My
Martin Luther King died for this shit. Malcolm X died for this shit. We talk about going to the extreme of extremists. These people are extremists. These people are murderers. They have whole capitalism. And these insane goddamn people, every year, they gonna take their tax dollars. With no goddamn excuse. With no goddamn apology. Why should you be apologetic?
That's right.
It's something you should be apologetic about. God damn it, you should be tight. Indigenous people, you should be tight.
Who do you want to vote for?
Not him, fuck all of them.
Well, who do you want them to vote for then?
The people in that community. Have somebody from community running. Fuck
We
them.
have two choices. We have Schubert and him.
No, fuck,
Schubert's gonna do nothing.
Look, it doesn't matter. I wouldn't vote for him or Schubert.
So
I would rather vote for somebody from the
Schubert
community.
It's about convicting.
It's about
making a choice.
Yeah, listen, you shut
You have to choose between the choice.
Shut up, peasant. Shut your ass up. Like I said, we already know that the United States was built upon racism since the 1800s. This is no secret.
1600s. Racism was 1690s.
1600s, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sweetie, I love you. Thank you, sister. I know that's your sister talking. But anyways, like I said,
Right.
fuck him. I wouldn't vote for that cracker. Y'all can go ahead and carry the fuck
So you
on.
made up your mind. You
Man,
can
shut
leave
your
and let
president
the rest
ass
of us
up.
talk.
You look like Donald Trump grandpa, motherfucker. Shut the fuck up. No, you don't wait.
I have a First
Yeah, no, a
Amendment
person
right.
of color. And you gonna bow down, motherfucker.
I have a
You
First
come from the
Amendment
Caucasus
right.
Mountains. And you gonna honor me as a king. Sit your punk ass down in that seat. Fuck out of here. Y'all built a foundation of lies. My cousin was Jamar Clark. My cousin was murdered by the police officers. Philando Castile, he was murdered. Jack Robinson was murdered. Oscar Grant was murdered. Sandra Bland was murdered. August Sterling was murdered. Michael Brown was murdered. Timothy Rice was murdered. Trayvon Martin, LaQuan McDonald, Raquel Boyd, Joseph Mann. Everybody was murdered. Y'all stand for what's right. Fuck these people. If I gotta vote for somebody, let it be for somebody from y'all community.
Sir, we
Let it be for somebody from y'all community.
Sir, what's your name?
My name is Alexander Clark.
Alexander Clark, Mr. Alexander Clark. We are on your
Turn the
side.
fuck on. Fuck him though.
We understand we're doing this whole thing because of the injustices that we
No,
witnessed.
he uphold that same fucking system.
We haven't given him a chance to
Man,
answer.
fuck his chance. You can hear through his voice when he contradicted himself.
Well, we
He been
respect-
contradicting himself.
We respect-
What type of shit is that? No bail.
Mr. Clark.
I'm gonna take away bail.
Mr.
Who the
Clark.
fuck does that?
Mr. Clark.
You talk about the school and prison pipeline. Did you not know they base the school and prison pipeline off the third grade literacy rate?
Mr. Clark.
And every black person in this world is whatever, what they say, we're somehow able to become statistics. You know what fucking system you're upholding. Cracker? Fuck you, peasant.
Mr. Clark. We respect your opinion, but we have
No,
to
fuck that.
request the respect and
You got me
respect.
pissed off. My cousin was murdered. Stephon Clark was murdered. Man, what you gonna do about them cops that murdered him, goddammit? Is you gonna convict them?
Make a statement.
Is you gonna convict them? Yes or no? Fuck that. Hold them accountable.
Make your commitment to convict
We
these
understand
people.
your sentiments, but we have to run this
Fuck the
debate.
sentiments. I don't give a fuck about them big words you using. Use words. You don't understand my anger because you can't relate.
I do understand your anger.
Fuck out of here.
But we have to continue,
You can sit there and smile. Fuck you and your motherfucking daddy and that's you come from.
and we have to be
And fuck isn't.
respectful.
Fuck your whole generation.
Mr. Clark,
Fuck all y'all. Now all motherfuckers can die, motherfuckers. Peasant ass motherfuckers. Y'all see her lie to these people. Y'all come here and rob these people of their dignity. You talk about what you can do for these people. You was a fucking liar. Anybody who stand for your line pack of what bullshit, man, I swear to God, they shouldn't even vote for your pussy ass. Now, no, ask that question. What about Stephon Clark, motherfucker? What about police reinforcement? What about these homeless people that sleep outside City Hall? The fuck y'all gonna do about them?
We all need to ask these questions.
so
We
there's,
need to have any platform because no one is listening.
So, as we all know, we're here to engage in debate respectfully with the community. So, we understand the anger and the frustration in the community. We want to acknowledge that we understand that feeling, but we have to be able to be respectful and continuing this debate. So, I apologize for that, and we'll try to answer that question.
Well, just because, rants aside, everybody knows that Stephon Clark is the issue right now in town. If it's not that, it's the East Area rapist is what everybody's talking about. So just to clear the air and set the record straight, what can you or cannot say about the Stephon Clark case right now?
First, I want to say that his opinion is opinion that a lot of people share. And regardless of how the message came out, that's a message that a lot of people have. And he said a lot of things in there that are true. That this system has been unfair for a long time, and I've been a part of it. That's 100% true. And I think that that message is the same message we've heard if you've been down to City Hall and if you've been downtown and been a part of what's happened in the aftermath of the Stephon Clark shooting. I've been to a lot of different meetings and City Hall events and events in the community, and that perspective is a perspective that is shared by a lot of people because the system doesn't work for everybody, and everybody knows that. What I can tell you about the Stephon Clark shooting is this. I have no problem holding law enforcement accountable when the facts and the circumstances lead me to that conclusion. I've talked about my platform. Part of my platform involves reopening the Joseph Mann shooting based on some new information that came to light in December. I can tell you that we need to transform law enforcement in the ways of transparency and the ways of accountability, and that's part of my platform, and I hope to put that to work for you.
Okay. Just to move on with a few more questions, and we're going to open up to a couple of questions from the audience since somebody else took up a lot of the time. Charging and sentencing. That's one area that a lot of people have some concerns about, which goes towards the unfairness of the criminal justice system. A lot of times, prosecutors are the ones and DAs are the ones that decide whether to charge people, what charge to file. If you're elected, how would you approach just sentencing? Charging itself. Would you go for the most severe punishment? Would you go for one that meets the crime? Would you go for one that forces somebody to take a plea deal? What would what would be your marching orders to the people in your department?
To think about the problem, we are the most incarcerated country in the world. 5% of the world, you guys know the stats, 5% of the world, 25% or so of the world's incarcerated population. Today in Sacramento, in the county, we still have one of the highest rates of felony arrests to imprisonment in the state. We're number 5. So whatever we're doing right now in the current administration is not what we want to be doing. One of the ways you can reduce incarceration rates, and given that incredibly expensive cost that we talked about earlier, that money could be spent elsewhere, is to simply file fewer cases, whether they be felonies or misdemeanors. So what you want to do, either at the intake or at the sentencing entry point of analysis, is to think about ways where people cannot enter the system in the first place. That certainly goes for juvenile justice and whether young people are entering the system at all, and that can absolutely go for misdemeanor and felony filings as well.
Okay, leads us into we have another person that wanted to come up and share a story and also ask a question. Allegra?
Please don't swear me.
Suffering that we just witnessed from my community. I empathize with that because I understand the injustices of the criminal justice system. My personal experience with sentencing and long-term solitary confinement is personal. The state of California keeps individuals incarcerated in solitary confinement for up to 46 years. That's a personal experience. I also have experience in the criminal justice system on the other end, as a wife of a former prison guard. So the pain that you heard from Stephon Clark's family member, that's real pain. It's pain from injustice, decade after decade after decade after decade. So as a community leader and an advocate volunteering on behalf of our community, I'm here today to speak a little bit about sentencing. We run a veterans home in the Fruit Ridge Manor area. One of our veterans is a Iraq vet, served in wartime. He was recently picked up and put in jail for 15 days for not paying child support. He did not pay the child support because he had the money and he just didn't want to pay the child support. I've witnessed this man live off of the crumbs that he did after serving in our U.S. military. So for non-payment of child support, the United States military veteran from Iraq war was taken to jail for 15 days and put into solitary confinement. So how is it that we as a country and as a city is still utilizing solitary confinement for something like that? I just don't get it. So my question to you would be, since I'm a believer in ending solitary confinement, and I'm also a believer in restorative justice and alternative sentencing, my question to you would be, what is your position on alternative sentencing and restorative justice practices for the city of Sacramento, providing you were voted in as our next DA?
Right. If we Thank you for your question. Restorative justice is not a new concept. It will be new to Sacramento County in the form of neighborhood courts. They do them in other counties that are close to Sacramento County. We should absolutely have them here. You can use them for in a variety of ways, whether or not it's juvenile cases or adult cases. And the only limitations are the limitations that the current chief prosecutor has. And so I would, most certainly part of my platform, what I've discussed is the use of restorative justice programs so we can keep people from getting in the system. I think everyone agrees that once you get in the system, it's very hard to get out. And there are a lot of consequences that are associated with even being arrested, let alone a conviction. So if we can solve the issue without having that person enter the system in the first place, that is absolutely something we should be considering and implementing.
What is the actual appetite for that in Sacramento County? Like you mentioned, I know Yolo County has a pretty robust restorative justice system in neighborhood courts, but in Sac County it hasn't been part of the DNA here. You know, if elected, how hard would that be to not only get buy-in from your office, but also from the Sheriff's Department, from these other various agencies which tend to lean away more of a kind of a tough on crime approach?
There's there's federal money that you can match, so it wouldn't necessarily be a conversation with the Board of Supervisors or the City Council. There is absolutely an appetite with our community partners, in a lot of places in Sacramento County that would be more than happy to partner and take the lead in creating the program itself. And if you want programs like restorative justice to be successful, the more buy-in and the more commitment you have from your community partners, the people that are going to be running the court, the more successful it's going to be. I think that can absolutely work, and I think it could be robust and help solve that fifth highest incarceration rate that we continue to have.
I'm going to move on to our last category and then have room for a couple of questions, I hope. This one's on transparency and accountability. I know this is a big issue in our community right now for all the reasons that Mr. Clark had said. There's just, people don't understand what's going on. I mean, it's not just a lack of understanding the system. I think it's just, we've had agencies that haven't really gone out of their way to explain what they do and why. For cases involving police misconduct, including questionable shootings, corruption, and fraud, how will you investigate officers? I mean, will you commit to doing that? Would you be open to outside investigations from the state, as is happening right now with overseeing our Stephon Clark investigation? Or how would you go about that?
Yeah. Mr. Clark is correct that a lot of people have questions about transparency and accountability in law enforcement. So if we talk about transparency and accountability and how we retrain them, this is how I view the setting. One of them is who investigates the police. I think we've all come to accept, a lot of people have come to accept the idea that the police investigating themselves is inherently problematic. And so, yeah. There are really two ways that you can solve that problem. One way would be to have the Attorney General's office independently investigate all officer-involved shootings. That is a model that Kevin McCarty has been discussing and has proposed a bill on that. There is another way that you could do it. You could do it within the district attorney's office, provided that the investigators you had were not investigators that came from the police department or came from the sheriff's department, if that was the agency that you were investigating. So those are two ways. I quite frankly think it would be beneficial to have the latter. I would support either. But if you had a district attorney's office that had a separate unit and a couple of prosecutors that were removed and walled off from the rest of internal operations, that would leave the investigations of officer-involved shootings to a unit that was removed enough that you could successfully manage those cases. I think there is some importance to having the district attorney responsible for determining whether or not law enforcement has engaged in criminal wrongdoing. And so when we talk about accountability, I think everyone has come to the belief, not everybody, a lot of people, believe that the relationship between the district attorney's office and the agencies that they investigate is problematic, that it's too cozy. We have to find a way forward where the district attorney can be removed from those agencies. I think one way would not to be taking money from the police associations that typically and then we also have to discuss whether or not and how the police officer's Bill of Rights could be modified so in this current climate your average citizen could see more about when officers have engaged in criminal wrongdoing and or misconduct, not necessarily amounting to criminal conduct. And I would say that, you know, the Joseph Mann shooting and killing and the aftermath, which is the information that came to light through one of those officers, suggests that there was a lot of information that was protected by the police officer's Bill of Rights that would have been highly relevant to the investigation itself. So I think those are some of the areas where we are going to move forward and try to find more transparency and accountability in law enforcement.
And I have one more question on this, and I'm going to go to Christine, who had a question about juvenile justice. But as far as the workings of the DA's office, I mean, I know that up until now, there really hasn't been an explanation as to how, very recently, how the DA works as far as like when it comes to officer-involved shootings. Who gets the investigation first? When does it come to the DA's office? When does their ruling? When does it go? Is that something, if elected, that you would actually take more pains to actually go out into the community to explain? Because I feel like what we've seen thus far is having to ask the questions and getting an answer as opposed to being proactive about going out into the community and explaining these things that we all would actually, I think, really like to know.
Yeah, I think my biggest concern with the current administration, where I think they failed to lead, is immediately after the Stephon Clark shooting, instead of tweeting and being on social media about having fun times with law enforcement, the chief law enforcement officer, who is the district attorney, above the sheriff, above the police chief, should have made a phone call either to someone in the community that could reach out to the family or reach out to the family herself. You want to start to develop a relationship with the family so they understand what's going on with the case. You want to talk to them about Stephon, about the loss of life, offer your condolences. And I always, when I talk to families who have lost a child or a brother or a daughter, I always say, tell me about your son, tell me about your daughter, who were they? I've seen the last 30 seconds of their life. I know what the last 2 minutes were about, but who were they before that? And so maybe you'll learn a little something about the case that you're going to be looking at. Then you need to really get in front of it, right? In the first couple of days, you need to get out there and you need to explain to the public what is going on, the process that you've described, the fact that the police will be conducting an investigation, that as the district attorney, you will also be conducting an investigation. You should be providing that information to the family. You should be providing that information to the public. And then you should be setting dates or criteria by which your investigative steps are going to be completed, so people understand what is going on and what the time frame will be. We are currently in a situation where we have been provided no information about when the conclusion of the investigation will occur from the police department, the DA's office, and there is information that can be provided to you, and as your next district attorney, I'll do that in the case of all officer-involved shootings.
Thank you. Anyone have to speak oh, there you are.
I'm not really a public speaker, so please forgive me. Can you guys hear me? No.
Move a little closer to the microphone. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I'm not gonna take up very much of your time. I just wanted to, kind of touch on the point of the justice system and how it really needs to be reformed. My son is, he just turned 21 years old, and he's currently incarcerated. And you would think, okay, young black male, probably, he was, riding in a car on his way from work, and he picked up a friend, and the friend had a gun in his backpack. He didn't ask. I don't know how many of us ask people who ride with us what's in their possession, but, you know, whatever the case may be. He's now been sitting there 21 months waiting on a speedy trial. He had just got accepted to the United States Air Force. He was on his way to graduating from college. So he's not your typical child. He never even been to the principal office except for to get an award. And the current DA's ideal of justice was to offer him 10 years and 2 felonies. So that's why we're considering him, because I told him we were not going to take a felony. If you were going to give him a felony, you were going to have to earn it. And this is just one of my stories. I have so many, but because we've lost so much time tonight, I just thought I'd shorten it and just say, you know, the young black children in this area predominantly, and I'm going to speak to this area because I live in Elk Grove, but I came out here and I started a football team several years ago for children who didn't have anything to do to keep them off the streets. We had about 30 kids on each team, and we had 5 teams. And we kept those kids out of trouble. And I went to the police department and asked them if they wanted to sponsor the team. And they told me no, they were from Wells Park and they were probably Bloods. And it hurt my feelings because you're thinking that you're gonna make a difference, and you can't. And so I'm asking you, just basically, how do you feel about the DA's office being involved in the community and trying to not incarcerate our children for any reason? I mean, holding the police department accountable for what they're doing, just letting children sit there for long periods of time, just so that they will take a plea deal so that you can have a better record. Because that's basically what they did. There's children who've taken 3 strikes just so they can go home. And you know that all they have to do is pretty much spit on the sidewalk after that, and they're going 25 a lot. And these kids are 18 and 19 years old. So, and then I'm just gonna make an easy question and ask you, what is your position on life without parole for children or young people under 21 years old?
I can, what we've learned about, I like to start to talk about the juvenile mind. And we've learned over the last 15 or 20 years that the juvenile mind isn't fully developed until about 25, right? We did not, we are still operating on principles about how to treat young men and young women from about 20 or 25 years ago, right? And I like to tell people that if you were a doctor and you were using the same techniques that you used 25 years ago, you would be guilty of malpractice, right? So we have to create a justice system that appreciates that concept, that the juvenile mind is not fully developed until they were 25, So I would say to you that I do not agree with LWOP for people under the age of 25. I don't think it should be 21.
Well, we're just about out of time. I'm sorry that I didn't really have any time for questions from the audience, but Noah might be willing to stick around for a little bit to answer people's questions. I'm not putting you on the spot, but.
No, I'm actually looking forward to the second half of the debate. I'll be here. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be more than happy to. Thank you very much.
Thank you.